Capital punishment has been around since the inception of humanity. Only 48 countries continue to allow this cruel punishment, and the US is one of these countries, in company with Saudi Arabia, Somalia, India, China, and Iran, to name a few. Of Western countries, the US was the only one to execute a prisoner in 2020, and it wasn't just one person, but 17 people were killed.
The US has a prison problem, beyond the largest death row population in the world. 1% of the US population is incarcerated, accounting for more prisoners than any other country in the world, including those with nearly 3 times the population. 200,000 Americans are serving life sentences, meaning 1 in 7 prisoners are in prison for life. 1 in 5 Black prisoners are serving life sentences.
Many illusions have been created around the death penalty, including that it reduces murder rates, but this is just plain wrong. The South commits 80% of the total national executions, and the region's murder rate continues to be by far the highest. Furthermore, the Northeast had the fewest executions and the smallest murder rates by a significant margin.
Death row is rife with inequality. We need to look no further than the races of victims compared to the race of executed defendants. While white victims account for approximately 1/2 of all murder victims, 75% of all capital cases involve white victims. Furthermore, as of today, 21 people have been executed where the defendant was white and the murder victim Black, compared with 300 Black defendants executed for murders with white victims. When a white victim is killed, it is more than likely that the case will make it to death row. And if a defendant is Black, the case is almost a lost cause, no matter the evidence.
University of Iowa law professor David Boldis found that during the 1980s, prosecutors in Georgia sought the death penalty for 70% of Black defendants with the white victims, but for only 15% of white defendants with Black victims.
Today, we will be demonstrating the unparalleled cruelty and injustice of the executions carried out in the United States through 3 stories. To understand capital punishment in context, we need to look at an example of how it was used throughout history. Executions in America were almost identical for hundreds of years, until inventions like the electric chair or death-inducing drugs. The story of 3 failed pirates accused of murder epitomizes the picture of capital punishment from the 1600s to 1900s. Peter LaCroix, Joseph Baker, and Joseph Barrouse staged a mutiny on a small merchant schooner in early 1800, tossing the first mate overboard and wounding the captain. Quickly, they experienced problems navigating the ship and were forced to rely on the captain for safe passage to the West Indies. The captain outsmarted them, turning them over to the authorities immediately. These men were subjected to a 4-day trial and were all convicted of murder, attempted murder, mutiny, and attempted property theft. The murder, surprisingly enough, wasn't the nail in the coffin for this case. The property theft was the most important issue to the jury. In the late morning hours of May 9, 1800, the 3 failed pirates, dressed in white and accompanied by a Presbyterian minister and a Roman Catholic priest, were brought from prison by civil officers and conducted in a cart to Market Street Wharf. After winding their way through Philadelphia's streets, they were put on a boat to be conveyed to the place of execution, an island in the city's harbor. When they arrived at the fatal spot, the prisoners kneeled down, and after some time spent in prayer, they were prepared for the conclusion of the awful scene. Before they were launched into eternity, in the view of an immense concourse of spectators who crowded the wharves and the shipping, all 3 begged the world to forgive them. An hour later, after the hanging, their bodies were put into coffins and buried near the gallows. This execution process epitomizes the pre-modern execution system. Death for pretty much any property theft, murder, attempted murder, and rape at the jury's discretion. Immense amount of spectators cheering as prisoners were forced to beg for mercy and repent for their sins. Bodies hung as a spectacle long after their hanging to serve as a warning, but not too long, as more executions would come soon.
This is only one example. The death penalty continued on claiming lives throughout the 19th and 20th centuries with similar structure and convictions, with the only real difference being the execution method.
Similar disgusting practices were used, presenting prisoners' deaths as gifts to the world. Furman v. Georgia should have been a wake-up call that changed capital punishment in America forever, but the case revealed underlying problems with the death penalty as it was, and should have had a larger impact than it really did. Nevertheless, it is an important chapter in the story, demonstrating a change, although small, in the pattern of capital punishment. To get into the details of the case, William Henry Furman was attempting to burglarize a private home when a family member discovered him. When he attempted to flee, in doing so, he tripped and fell, with the gun going off and killing the resident in the home. Though an accident, state law demanded that since it took place during a felony, he received the death penalty, and the jury chose the death penalty. The defense tried to plead innocent, but being an African American male meant his sentence was almost guaranteed even before moving on to the Supreme Court. This case was primarily based in the Eighth Amendment's ban on cruel and unusual punishment in death penalty cases. The court's following decision with the use of the death penalties was put on hold while states revised their own criminal statutes to ensure that the death penalty was not applied arbitrarily or discriminatorily. The Supreme Court granted a certiorari limited to one question: whether imposing and carrying out the death penalty in these cases violated the Eighth Amendment's ban on cruel and unusual punishment, as previously stated. As applied to the states by the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, the court found that the death penalty was applied in a manner that disproportionately harmed minorities and the poor.
The vote was 5-4 against the death penalty. Justices Brennan and Marshall said it is cruel and unusual punishment and therefore unconstitutional. They would prohibit it entirely. Douglas wouldn't go quite as far. He said the death penalty has been imposed disproportionately on minority groups. More than half of the 600 people now under death sentence are black. Douglas left unanswered whether the death penalty administered equally might be legal for certain cases.
Maria Lucio was almost a victim of a new wave of executions coming post-Furman v. Georgia, marking a new brutal age of capital punishment. The unconstitutionality of capital punishment did not stop states from continuing to carry out this cruel practice.
In 2007, Miss Lucio's youngest child, Maria, accidentally fell down a flight of stairs. 2 days later, she could not be woken from a nap and was pronounced dead at the hospital. Miss Lucio was hastily arrested and taken into an interrogation. The detectives interviewing her used coercive methods known to produce false confessions.
If I beat you half to death, like that little child was beat, I bet you'd die too.
So I did not beat my daughter, sir.
No?
Not that cruel to my children.
What are those bruises on your little child?
They wanted me to admit to something that I was not capable of doing to my child. And the interrogation continued for maybe 7 hours until 3 o'clock in the morning. They just kept pointing fingers at me and threatening me and telling me that I was going to spend the rest of my life in prison and that I wasn't going to be able to see the rest of my children grow up and get married. And, they just kept throwing so many words at me. And I just told them I'm responsible for Mariah's bruises.
In 2008, Miss Lucio was sentenced to death based on the statements she was coerced into making during the marathon of interrogations. New scientific and expert evidence show that Miss Lucio's conviction was based on an unreliable coerced confession and unscientific false evidence that misled the jury into believing Mariah's death was a murder instead of the truth. She died following a tragic accidental fall.
The medical examiner who examined Lucio's daughter would testify at Lucio's trial, explaining that his daughter's injuries were consistent with a toddler falling from standing height. This would prove influential in earning Miss Lucio her stay of execution and a chance to be exonerated of her crime. Miss Lucio is one of the few death row inmates lucky enough to get a stay of execution. She now will fight her biggest battle, to get off of death row.
False confessions elicited by guilt-presumptive police interrogation tactics like the ones used against Miss Lucio are a primary cause of wrongful convictions in the United States. Of the 67 women listed on the National Registry of Exonerations who are exonerated after a murder conviction, over 1/4 involved false confessions.
False confessions are a tragedy that send people to jail for on average of 13 and a half years at a time. Since 2000, there have been 250 exonerations based on false confessions, demonstrating a systematic problem inherent to America. Thank you so much for watching to the end. Now, please subscribe, like, and turn on notifications so that you can see more content like this. Also, please reflect on what you've seen today. I understand the death row is not everyone's favorite topic, and often people try to avoid it, but it is an important one. Please recognize that our system is broken, and that we need to do everything we can to fix it.